in the world. Okay, it looks like we're back. And you were talking about how we don't really seem to have great leaders in the world right now. So,
Yeah, I was going on a little tangent though, but yes, I think that's like a big problem, and I don't think quote unquote new leadership. I don't even know where people they don't even know where to stand because potential leaders are not really sure. They're still dealing with this meaning crisis supposed to be proclaimed, and uh, and but this specifically also came up when you were sort of mentioning with regards to Rabbi Walpe or a lot of these rabbis, which are totally okay with this concept of you mentioned about him mentioning that you know that the Exodus didn't happen, but still being okay with being considered religious. So that's a serious statement, but I'm that sentiment isn't so foreign to me. If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind unpacking that a little.
please, go ahead.
So I think that we need to be a little sensitive to how we go about I guess like framing this concept of Judaism, but this relates to Christianity and the Bible as well, and this uh, intersects with Jordan Peterson. But I think there's room to have a divinely inspired religion that includes a lot of the allegory and myth that we have. And
Uh, and we lost Chezi, unfortunately. Hopefully, he will be back soon. Um, Sorry about this. When Chezi gets back, we will continue the discussion. Well, while Chezi's not here, I'll talk behind his back. So, I mean, he brings up an important point, which I'm hoping we'll get to talk about more when he comes back, which is that, um, the question is how much of the propositional, right, is integral to the actual religion, right? And this was David Wolpe's point. He's talking about a deeper understanding of Judaism, one that doesn't necessarily need Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? The exodus from Egypt to have actually happened. Now, I'm actually probably a little bit um, more on the modernist side myself. Well, not modernist, postmodernist, I guess you might call it, or pre-modernist. In that, I don't need it to be exactly word for word, detail for detail. That Moses said exactly those words in exactly that way, and to some people, that makes me a sort of um, right. So this is the thing. It's you know the Exodus is a beautiful story that is valuable even if it didn't actually happen. But I think this is where postmodernism goes too far, right? So Christians will say, without the resurrection, can you actually believe in Christianity? And I think the Exodus, in a very real way, so this actually reminds me of something. I note a lot in halachic man, Rav Soloveitchik, the Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, his magnum opus. There's a note in the back, which
Sorry,
like,
but
oh, perfectly fine. Glad to have you back. I was filling time while you were away. um,
all right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and now I can see you again. Yay!
Um, all right. Again, I'm
So,
really sorry about that.
that's perfectly fine. For some reason, things aren't going perfectly with this stream, but you were
Next,
you
yeah.
you were saying, and just, I mean, in the words of our little corner of the internet, the propositional, right, right, not necessarily focusing on the propositional, and the fact that you can in fact have a belief in the Bible, the way really Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein do, and I think to some extent Jordan Peterson has started doing, which is not necessarily focusing on the propositional aspects of it. I guess that was your point.
Uh, yes. However, as someone who's trying to live an Orthodox life, there's a lot of, again, just to use, let's say, Sam Harris's term of baby and bathwater. Just there's obviously a lot of baby, and one has to be very careful how one deals with this kind of myth or this kind of allegory, and needs to treat it with a lot of respect and be very delicate about it, because even in this web, specifically in Judaism, which is how much of it is divinely inspired, how much of it has to do with the rabbis, the history, the Crusades. All of this is bunched into a 2,000-year exile, which now gives us this version of Judaism that we practice today, specifically, again, Jews. And you have to parse that out, which is how much of God's voice, so to speak, is channeling, is being woven through that, and how much of it is part of our live conversation. And I
But
also think that
but
if
but
one looks,
but
sorry, please go ahead.
Chezi, I mean, I think this is something that our corner of the internet is very much actually trying to suss out, is at what point do you need it to be grounded in something that is actually propositional? Like, if you're saying, I mean, Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus, is the essence of who we are as Jews. I can't think of anything more fundamental. I mean, maybe Ma'amad Har Sinai, right? The standing at Sinai. But if you're going to say, can I mean, this becomes really very postmodernist in my thinking, because at some point you have to hook in with reality. And I was going to quote, Rav Soloveitchik in Halachic Man. There's a note at the end where he says, if you don't if you don't connect to science and the world as it actually is, you're going to destroy the entire created order, right? So,
Mhm.
at what point can we say it, this is it's enough for it to just be metaphorical and to be myth?
At what point can we say that? So I think it's first of all, that's a fine question, and I think it's important to parse it out, because there's also levels to when this conversation sort of needs to be discussed. But let me start, if you don't mind, with an example that I need to deal with, like on the day to day. I have I want to sit with my children. I have three children, and I sit
Can
with
hear
them
you.
on. Yeah, thank you. And I sit with them on the Sabbath, and I review with them the weekly Torah reading, and I go through them as other different things that we go through. But growing up, there's these books where had, for example, Mount Sinai and that epic revelation is you see white men with beards and skull caps on their head, and there's like a dividing line, and all the women are on the other side, and there's a fiery hand coming out from the sky. And the book I read with my kids today has a picture of someone that looks Middle Eastern. And anytime where there's a conversation with God, you just see his eyes closed and his face up to the sky, which is showing some sort of inspiration going on. Now, the text over there is still the same text, but that is I think that's a much more reasonable and healthy image for my child to grow up with one that is, and I'm going to use God number one and God number two over here. I really think the relationship should be grounded more in God in the agentic, in the arena God. And our job as parents or educators is to then frame that within this narrative. Specifically, the Jewish narrative is our narrative, which has the Exodus. Now, I can, from a technical perspective or academic perspective, deal with different academic readings, and I could find proofs that really there was a group, or there's three different groups, and they got together. And Yecheskel Koifman talks about this, and Yisrael Knol talks about this. So, but even if I got to a point where I could pinpoint and say, here there was an Exodus, and it wasn't X many years, it was really 50 years. The question then would be, at what point is that something that makes sense to discuss with my son? Or when I discuss with them the Passover, which is coming over now, do I still have the same myth and whole grand story that I give him? Now, at this point, personally, I wrestle with the fact that I need to still deal with a community that I live in, and I deal with the fact that I don't know if many minds in a larger community can really be dealing with these kinds of abstract ideas without completely knocking off their complete foundations, whatever is undergirding their relationship. Because, like, my mother, for example, is a very pious woman, but she definitely thinks that her prayers, affect, God is listening and he will do X, Y, Z. However, Maimonides, within her own religion, is telling her that that's not happening.
See, okay, so I actually brought this up in a comment to one of PBK's videos, which is, in Maimonides, his introduction to the commentary on the Mishnah in Perek Chelek, he gives this, which is Sanhedrin chapter 10, he gives a very, very long explanation of how some people take things very literally, which he thinks is absolutely wrong. And he compares them to a child, and he says that, you tell a child that you're going to give him candy so he learns how to read. And then you tell him, oh, I'm going to buy you nice clothes so he gets good grades in school. And then you say, I'm going to buy you a car. And then you tell him, if you go to college, you're going to get a great job. And you are little by little leading that person into understanding. And the way I put it, which I'm kind of proud of, is that the sweets and the sweets and toys that you end up giving that child for reading, for learning to read, are not made by Hershey and Hasbro. The sweetness is, and the toys are actually the great knowledge that he, as a 5-year-old, would never understand is worth far, far more.
I agree with that.
I have a problem with what I call the 6 feet deep interpretation of the people I call rabbits, who I say wear Judaism like they wear drag, which is they're telling you, oh, don't give the kid the sweets and toys. That the kid will not actually get the sweets and the toys.
So I think that's okay. So thank you for focusing me in a little more on that. So I am wrestling with that because I agree with you that a lot of these treats and toys are extremely necessary, and it's very difficult for us to sort of Sam Jordan Peterson discussed it with Sam Harris in one of their conversations. He was like, let's say you pull off your whole mindfulness app, and you're a perfect example of someone that you could do this, Sam. You could be moral, and you don't need any of this religion. But what are all of us supposed to be doing, right? What are the rest of the people supposed to be doing if you take this away? So I agree with you that removing these treats and candies is very problematic. However, and this is my more specific concern with how technology is advancing and how biology and medicine is advancing, is it so crazy to assume that in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, we're going to be having our phones in our heads or the metaverse we're going to be living in? So I'll give you an example. I, as a child, needed to write a report about Moses. And my father's a professor, and my mother's a teacher, and my father's a psychologist. Nevertheless, I went up to my father's study and I took the relevant religious books that I would be using, and I wrote my report about it for my school. If I would be asking my son to be doing that today, so his first question is going to be, as he goes online, is, Dad, who is Freud, and why is he telling me that Moses is an Egyptian prince and he's being inspired by? And then he starts noticing that, like, isn't it strange that the tabernacle is the same size of Ramesses II's temple? And now you have to start dealing with that. Now, one is, even if one feels well-versed to deal with that, many people aren't well-versed to deal with that. And that is, what do we want to be teaching our kids? What, quote-unquote, ammunition do we want to be giving them? Not as far as apologetics, but teaching them how to deal with these multiple truths at the same time, and how to deal with these, like the Maimonides calls these, like what you're discussing, necessary truths, amitot achrachiyot, which is akin to Brett Weinstein's allegorical truths. So I'm definitely not rushing to tell people that, like, that the Exodus didn't happen. However, I believe that the narrative of an Exodus can eventually, I think we are getting closer to a place where that could be integrated into us with what that concept means, and the narrative it's giving us and the tools it's giving us. And even if we find out that it was less time, and even if we found out that it wasn't exactly what we thought it was, I still don't think that should completely destroy our foundations. Like, I have constructed personally for myself a place where even if Moses didn't exist, that doesn't ruin my relationship with God. And even more so, the more abstract those things become, the closer, in a certain sense, I feel. However, I'm not running around saying that those things aren't true. I think that would be reckless, and that's not the narrative that I'm teaching my kids. But
now we get to the authenticity, Chezi. At what
Sure.
point are you actually just wearing Judaism as a garment?
Well, I mean, part of this is what you were discussing. So, like, I could, quote unquote, not believe and still practice these things. And as far as rabbinic Judaism is considered, like, it's all fair game. Like, I'm waking up in the morning and I pray every day, and I do the elements I need to do. However, granted that this thought process does allow me more flexibility with regards to the evolution of halacha, which is a separate topic which we could discuss. But as far as authenticity, I believe that I'm being my most authentic self, and I believe that I'm following in the footsteps of, and in Hebrew you say katonti, but like I'm not tooting my own horn, but I'm saying I believe that I'm following in the steps of the prophets, with really listening to that still that still small voice, that kol dmama daka, and it's not a fire and it's not a brimstone, and our relationship, even if that was a true relationship, we are far removed from those miracles, and we are supposed to find God and our relationship within this world we live in today. And I don't necessarily think I'm not being authentic by challenging these things and really keeping true to our namesake Yisrael and wrestling with God and these concepts. Now, what it is granted, it is dangerous to play around in these orchards and like as the Pardes or in these waters if one doesn't feel secure enough, because it could definitely be devastating to one's religion. And I think it could be very problematic trying to introduce ideas like this into mainstream orthodoxy, because it could be very unsettling. However, again, as technology moves forward and as you have smart cities that are gonna, pop up, you're gonna have dynamics where are religious Jews not living suddenly in Jerusalem because in the year 2080 it's a smart city, or are they gonna figure out some sort of version how they deal with that on the Sabbath? And once they do, you have to ask yourself then why did they not do it now? And like, is this reaction, like as we move forward, as we could start tweaking DNA and playing with our IQ and with longevity, there are ramifications to how humans are interacting, how we exist, how we think, and how then even this divinely true religion, how it interacts with humans is only true as long as humans are sort of staying the same. But I believe that, as we are changing, the Torah, believing it's divinely inspired, is a tool at the end of the day to allow us to manifest ourselves throughout this world. And
okay,
sorry, please, go ahead.
I really think at this point you've to me you've gone off the what I would call the misnagdisha deep end, which is it doesn't matter if there's an Eibishter. It just as long as we keep halal.
Wait a second. I didn't say that. I never claimed that it wasn't an Eibishter. That wasn't my claim. My claim was that biblical texts, I'm not bogged down to the authenticity of each line over there. That doesn't mean that I don't think that those concepts and those words are, again, divinely inspired, or divinely inspired enough, like we'll use a Jordan Peterson term, like a meta truth. Okay, so those work on many different levels. That doesn't mean, I'm not claiming that there's no God, and I just personally think that a more authentic relationship, that's the wrong word actually, but I just think again, the Arenic God is the God that the relationship of all the other religions or the world is having with, quote unquote, the Eibishter or God. The agentic God is the narrative that we bring down, or that's brought down to us, or divinely brought down as a collective. And that's already a bigger part of a larger story, as there's the individual, and then there's the collective, and there's, specifically for Jews, there's the collective and land, and dealing with, nature and intellect and nefesh and combining those things. But we don't have to go down like a mystical path. But I'm not claiming that there's not an Eibishter. And while, yes, you could live a good life and be a moral person and live in a Jewish community specifically while not believing in God. And
I don't think that's true. That's not. I don't think that's true. I don't think you're an Orthodox Jew if you're just pretending.
I agree. If you're just pretending, that's true. There's a difference between just pretending and wrestling with doubt. Well, first of all, before we should say we should be sure, even in Maimonides with his allegory of the palace, and we're in the garden and we get closer and closer inside, eventually even then he ends up standing on this pillar of doubt, because you can never be totally sure. But
well, that's what emunah is. Yes,
correct.
Correct. Right. So we have a faith, and that's part of living in the world that we live in. But if it's not an actual faith, right? That Chezi Spero lives in Jerusalem, something that 100 years ago would be absolutely mind-boggling, right? And that God engineered that, right? And hopefully it's been long enough that we can say this. I realize it's a lot easier for a Sephardic Jew to say this than an Ashkenazi Jew, but that during the Holocaust, God was there,
But
that
I agree with that completely, and that doesn't whether there's terror attacks and like those things aren't shocking to me, and I would to agree with your point. I think the way this manifests, aside from having these concepts of God, ultimately the practice, and this is true whether it's Sam Harris's app, or whether it's Estuary, or whether it's the Buddhist that's rubbing his food, or the Jew that's saying his bracha. These practices, okay, they allow for this engagement to become more true, because I live a certain reality. Why I accept science, and I still, I wake up and I pray on the food, and when I go out of the bathroom, and I stand up for certain things, and I don't sit in my father's chair, and all the litany of the 613 commandments that are relevant to me. Try to
you're droiding,
and it's invitation. I'm sorry.
You droided out. We didn't hear the last couple of sentences. Sorry.
I was saying that the 613 commandments that I adhere to that are relevant to me, I don't do them because there's the finger in the sky pointing me saying like do this or else. However, rather I feel that I'm being invited to engage in a way of life which will allow me to connect to whether we want to call it oneness, or there's many different words, but I also believe that the Buddhist, as long as he's doing it, a term in Hebrew is called kavanah, but as long as he's being mindful about it and true to it, then I believe he too is connecting to the Almighty. And a great example of this is there's a rabbi named Rav Benny Lau, and he posits that when you see like a Muslim, specifically this relates to Jews because Jews and Arabs live together in Israel, if you see a Muslim praying, so the relevant commandments or halachot of prayer relate to him as well. So when I'm praying, one should stand around like a few feet away from me, because you shouldn't be in his space of prayer. So if I'm walking and I'm on construction sites all the time, when I see workers that are praying, I make sure that the room stays closed, that no one's bothering them, because I understand that not only am I being respectful, but rather they're engaging the same game I'm engaging in. Now, That doesn't make my religion feel any smaller, or me feel like that like, oh, this was a made-up story. However, even in our own Bible, when the Israelites are coming to Israel, God says, should they go through Edom? Should they go through what Esau's, in theory, his land is? And God says, no, those are your brothers, and you're not going to go through there, because they have their own narrative and they have their own story. But if we want to be able to hold all these truths together, then, which I believe ultimately will be how we move forward, obviously in a political conversation as well, you can't assume then that you're going to have to wrestle with the fact that when Moses was in a basket, there are 3 stories that predate that story where there is a leader on a basket. So, and you have to deal with the fact that, we just had Purim, that Mordechai, his name is Mordechai because of Marduk, which is Marduk, and that Maima Pnei Tehom is most probably Tiamat. Now, those don't in any way make me feel like then this has all been a lie. It just makes me feel more in love and more interested in the glory of God. But that, allowing myself to play that game personally, gives me more flexibility than when I think about the challenges coming ahead, whether it's the meaning crisis or whether it's Judaism or religions in large dealing with the phase shift that reality is going to. And in some ways, religion and a lot of these quote unquote rules and halachot and commandments may apply more, and one maybe makes more sense to quote unquote be more conservative about some of these things. But again, as someone religious, growing up there are a lot of rules between the sexes. So you shouldn't be alone with if you're not married, you shouldn't be alone with a single woman, and you shouldn't be there shouldn't be any physical interaction until you're married. So whether or not this is how healthy this is and how practical this is, you could definitely see in the Me Too movement that having this built into into a community, assuming it's done in a healthy and balanced measure, is would be probably beneficial to society. And there's many other versions like this. So again, I think maybe perhaps it is reckless of Rabbi Wolpe to, with his position, to be coming out and saying it didn't happen and that's fine. Because even if that's what he thought, you have to think about what the ripples of that is. Like what happens if someone's hearing you and how suddenly that shakes that whole foundation. However, I do think that by hook or by crook, we are getting we're moving forward towards that conversation eventually.
Okay, so I'm going to do a lot of explanation for the people who are watching. And
I'm so sorry. Sorry. If there's any phrase you need to re-explain.
No. In fact, my basic thinking usually is that it's better just for us to have the conversation at the level we're having it. But I just think this calls for it, both because this is the first time we've really spoken to each other, and because what you're talking about is just so important and foundational. So Ben asked a really good question. Why would a person practice Judaism while not believing that God exists? And obviously Chezi believes that in God, but there are definitely Hasidic Jews who don't really believe in God, and they live a Hasidic lifestyle because it is, first of all, they were born into it. That all their family, it's what they know. It's an actually pretty good lifestyle. You know, I was incredibly happy when I was living as an Orthodox Jew, other than all the problems I had, which I won't get into, which stopped me from living as an Orthodox Jew. It's a beautiful lifestyle, and a lot of what you seem to be talking about, and unfortunately you can't see me, because I'm having technical problems. But for me as a Baal Tshuva, right, as somebody who came from a secular environment where the most natural thing was to say that Mordechai comes from Marduk and Tehom comes from Tiamat, right? For me, I don't have these problems or these expectations, maybe because I'm smart enough to fool myself, right? I can talk about Omphalos until the cows come home and explain creation that way, right? And I understand that based on who you are and what you've lived, certain things might cause you all kinds of thought, right? But I think the Christians have a really strong point when they talk about empty legalism, right? And I think there's a really important thing. Look, so I personally, being Chabad-ish, I think the Rebbe was a Navi. I really do. I think he saw things through Ruach HaKodesh and for example, one of the very few halachic things that the Rebbe got involved with, he only got involved with 3 halachic questions strongly, and one of them was using electricity on Shabbat, because in the 30s there were actually Orthodox rabbis who were saying, no, electricity isn't fire, and you can turn electric lights on and off, and you can use microphones. And the Rebbe came out very strongly against this, and he went on a campaign which he apparently convinced the Chazon Ish, and once the Chazon Ish was convinced, it pretty much became Orthodox halacha that no, you can't turn on and off lights, and you can't use microphones on Shabbat. And in 2022, when I look back on that discussion from almost 100 years ago, nothing has been as obvious to me as what a bracha this has been to the Orthodox Jewish community. What a huge bracha it has been that our synagogues cannot are small enough that people get to know each other, that we haven't turned into mega churches, that people live near their synagogues. And today we see people who are not religious at all, like Eric Weinstein and Dave Rubin, talking about the greatness of Shabbat and turning off their phones, and people who are not at all religious actually keeping Shabbat because they see that the bracha of the unpluggedness, right?
Well,
And,
I wouldn't.
and for me, that's
Exactly.
that's an agentic God. That's what makes Judaism true. And I don't want to wear Judaism as a beged, as a
Wait,
levush.
I need you to. What do you mean by that's an agentic God and that's what Judaism is?
That's
You're saying like the fact like the Shabbos manifestation, that's a manifestation of the agentic God, and that's what Judaism
the
is.
fact that the Rebbe and the Rabbanim in 1930s decided that the halacha is you cannot use a microphone, you cannot ride in a car, right?
Okay.
And the bracha that came from it is a revelation of godliness.
I mean, that's because what you're stating is we could see now that the blessing of having this this day off, so to speak, and its impacts on the Jewish communities is a clear indication of how right they were. Because if they didn't, if they were more lax about this, it would have been a disaster. Am I understanding you correctly?
Not just how right they were, but that God was guiding them.
Okay, so, I mean, but this is, I mean, we're obviously looking back at history, and you're saying like based on this decision that they did right now, I see in this God's God's actions. However, it's as someone that loves Sabbath and gets extremely depressed every at the end of Shabbat as Shabbat comes to a close. As I tell my brother, we speak daily. I tell him that Shabbos is an island that we're swimming to all week long. So I definitely I'm very sympathetic to that. However, again, it's coming regardless. Like I said, smart cities, chips inside your body. Our whole attitude towards we engage the world is going to change. And again, I'm not running and saying it's happening tomorrow. And this is specifically important because within the Orthodox community, rabbis are still trying to deal with concepts like aguna, which means a married woman that is forbidden to get divorced because her husband won't give her the divorce deed. So while they're still dealing with this thing, they have things going to challenge a lot of these things. Now, I agree with you that if we don't want Shabbos to turn into every other day of the week, and that our synagogues turn into megachurches. However, if we don't realize that it's going to require more flexibility within, as in the halacha is going to have to change, and you could say it has, and it's reactionary, and when it does, it will. When I speak to specific rabbis in Israel, they're not having this conversation, or they say that we hear what you're saying, and yes, it's a real problem. And I want to just point about something you said about not religious people keeping Shabbat, or Dave Rubin or Eric Weinstein. And this also relates to another phrase in Judaism is called Shivim Panim LaTorah, 70 faces to the Torah. I wouldn't start, if someone's keeping Shabbos, then I don't want to call him not religious. I want to say that he's on his own spiritual quest. You'd be like, well, specifically how a dictionary defines religion, or we are all experiencing, I would say that in many ways we are a more religious society than other times in history. Obviously, there's been times where we've been more religious, but we are engaging in our own ways. And Jordan and Paul talks about this, about the spirits everywhere going around, or Peterson talks about this, about, that this narrative and the Bible is really all cooked in, and we're all looking through this whole narrative. So there's really no escaping this. So I don't run to call people necessarily not religious, and that's why Jordan Peterson thinks that even atheists really are actually being religious. And I think it behooves us to try to bring these people in and not necessarily push them away, because I look at Eric Weinstein and I say, this is someone I want engaging the concept of God seriously. And I'm less concerned about what Dave Rubin thinks, but I don't want to go to these people and be like, you're beyond the pale. And I'll give you another example of this. My brother is secular, and he works for the Israeli government, and he gets all these accolades, and they write to him that he is a man of truth, and he exemplifies truth and honesty and righteousness. Now I go to my mother, who had a very hard time with my brother. This is like over 25 years ago, that he quote unquote left the faith, or in Hebrew it's called off the derech, off the path, and he was living this this other life. However, I go to her and I say, look at him. He is manifesting God's attributes, and he is being called by people around him, saying justice and truth. I'm like, so you won, Mrs. Spero. Like, that, what you wanted happened. Now, yes, he's not keeping the Sabbath exactly the way you are, but there's more to that. And I want to be able to accept him within our fold, because a lot of people like him are interested in being in the fold, just not necessarily the way we define it. And if I'm not going to accept him in the fold, I also, as a religious Orthodox Jew, need to look at, let's say, the ultra-Orthodox community, or my brethren. And now, not all, and this is a generalization, but many in Israel specifically, there's a tax issue. They're not serving in the military. They're not teaching kids basic sciences. And these causes a lot of tribulations, throwing stones on shopkeepers because they're not exactly the same level of dietary restrictions. So aren't these things problematic with regards to religion? And if I'm still going to accept them as part of my prayer group of 10 people who create a union, which our religion believes is the ideal way to speak to God. So they are accepted, but my brother, who's being called a person of truth, he's not considered religious.
Okay, so Chezi, the problem I see here is you're a Chabadnik, you just don't know it.
I mean, I believe in Chachmei Bina. I don't call myself Orthodox or not. I love God, and I.
No. But it's beyond that. No, really, because look, everything you're talking about are things that the Rebbe talked about and fought with the Hisnagdish world about, and you come from a very Litvish world, and the problems you have seem very Litvish to me. You're a misnagid, Hashem Yirachem. And as somebody who doesn't keep halacha, I really the halachas I keep, it's by mistake. Hashem should forgive me. I don't feel that I'm not Jewish. I don't feel that God's not in my life. And when Steve Greenberg, I don't know if you know who he is. He claims to be the first Orthodox gay rabbi. He's a graduate of Yeshiva University, REITs, right? Uh-huh. And he's a gay activist. He came to our Chabad house with his partner. His partner, who has a beautiful singing voice, was the Shliach Tzibor for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Uh-huh. And the two of them came and ate in the sukkah during Sukkot. And the Shliach, Rabbi Wagner, who's a Er L'Chayid, knew who this was and invited him into his sukkah because that's what the Rebbe taught.
I wouldn't stop it. That was what the Rebbe taught. I believe that's what God's expecting.
I agree with you because I think God is a Chabadnik. But
Yeah.
but that doesn't change the fact that Rabbi Wagner will say the exact same thing that every other Chabadnik will, which is just because there are gay Jews doesn't mean that Judaism is not heteronormative and you cannot be a gay Orthodox rabbi. Because there is an Eibishter. The Eibishter has revealed his views to us. And when a Rav, and this is my problem with going to a posek, I don't have a posek because I don't have a posek that I believe has siyata deshmaya, who can tell me that for me, the psak halacha will in fact be what the Eibishter wants.
Well, I don't believe also, as you know, as we run into the future, I don't think that's going to be really the relationship anymore. I think it's more true for someone that has a question, a religious question, and there's someone that's intrigued by this and honest about this, and they're going to go online and they're going to see various different answers. And what I think the relationship should, and this is just a suggestion, but like what it should evolve into is you go to your rabbi that you have a relationship with and you tell him, I saw these few things. Now your rabbi knows you, is going to tell you, yeah, these 7 answers that you gave me. First of all, how wonderful it is that you could see over here the diversity in thought while still staying within the same family. Number 1. Number 2. So first of all, you should already feel safe. Whether you pick number 1 or 7, whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, you're hugged and loved by God. That's number 1. Number 2.
And if you're a Gentile.
We'll give an example. This is, Joey Cohen. So Joey, I know your parents. So your parents usually go by version number 1. And I know your grandfather actually did number 2, but he was Dutch. And if you want to, I think it makes sense that 3 and 6 also make sense. 5 and 7, I really don't see a place for them. And like, it's sort of, I'm not sure about that, but like, I wouldn't do that, but it makes sense. This other rabbi says you can. And then the person, Joey, is going to have to make his own decision based on getting that guidance, knowing himself, and it requires individual work. It requires one to want to create this relationship. So I'm asking because I want to know how to best engage in the world. And this goes all the way down to, what shoe I put on in the morning. I don't know if people are aware of that, but that's also one of the commandments. Now, if someone is actually aligned with himself and he wakes up in the morning and he's so on point, then yes, I believe that even the shoe he puts on, one could be mindful about that. And that person obviously is living a very aligned life and potentially, could perform great feats. And we're all striving for that. But I believe if we're striving for that honestly and we're looking for an answer, and I'm not calling it picking and choosing, but an adult will have to look at the menu in front of him and then make a calculated decision. And I'm not saying the rabbi is a waiter, but a real trained chef or a real trained chef knows how to prepare a meal and present it for you. So here too, you're being presented with a whole buffet of ideas. You're going to have to now sift through that. And that's also part of the wrestling. But this goes to Eric Weinstein, and I said about, being off the derech, my brother being off the path. We should really create or try to create a very wide path that it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to bend to everyone or an individual needs to now say, then everything's okay. He just needs to realize that there's room for other people to participate in this relationship.
Right. I mean, okay, so Paul talks about bounded set and centered set. I think Hasidic Judaism, unlike Misnagdish Judaism, is very a centered religion, right? And frankly, when you look at Chabad, this is one of the problems that the Misnagdim have with Chabad, is, yeah, we have our crazies and we don't throw them under the bus. And
Yeah, but
when you go to the average Chabad synagogue, at least in the United States, most people drive there. Most people drive.
Yeah, but it's important to explain, like, because the game Chabad is playing, and I don't use game, I'm not using that in the derogatory sense. Just once you're playing with mysticism, basically, then and it's wrong. I believe now that it's wrong that the Mitznagdim, or let's say the Litvak world, doesn't really look at what I believe now, also academically and historically speaking, we know to be true, as mysticism or early versions of it, as going together side by side with the Gemara. As in, these are both Paul's classic. In a certain way, these are both these are both lenses that we need to put on.
Jewish mysticism definitely existed during the Second Temple period. We know that is true.
And so I believe that and ultimately that is the conversation that bubbles up, whether it's in Greece or whether it's in India or whether it's with the Sufis, or like I'm saying, that game, and now today with the John Hopkins game, like that is obviously a whole other game that's happening. Now, Chabad integrate that. And once that's integrated, and once the oneness, and once you're taking on the different spheres, you can't look at Joe Schmo because his skull cap is not the right size, or his phylacteries are not at the right time, and say like he's not part of the team anymore. Because once you accept a certain version of mysticism, then you're playing a different game. Then it's love, it's oneness, it's togetherness. And there isn't really room then for like, well, that's, he can't and you can't marry him and he's not pure enough. And it's a real problem. But that clearly is the conversation. Again, to me, that's clearly the conversation moving forward. And going back to our text, Solomon is talking about, first of all, he doesn't call it a temple. He calls it Beit Tfilah, a house of prayer. Also, which was removing all these, sacrifices. Second of all, L'chol ha'amim, to all the nations. And in his utopian world, there's, even, other kings and other monarchs are going to, when they pray, they're going to face towards Jerusalem. It doesn't mean that their religion now turns into Judaism. It just means we're having a shared conversation. And this corner of the internet, and that's why looking at Paul in a certain way, like, I'm sort of envious because he is really doing Hashem's work in many beautiful ways.
I agree.
And it's sad for me again as a religious Jew, because I believe the Christian world would have so much fun with so much of our texts that just are not translated. but I look at Jordan Peterson and he says, Reshit Chochma Yirat Hashem. Right? The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. And 7,000 people are in this and they're like drinking up his words. Like, this is Pirkei Avos. This is things that, we grew up on.
Yeah.
But yet they're not capitalized the way he's doing it. He's reinvigorating them with this power. And it's not that he's magical or that he is tapping into that truth again, which in a certain way, after 2,000 years of exile, even though you know Hebrew and I know Hebrew, that jargon becomes we become deaf to it. And I say these words many times, like I pray in English because it's more natural to me to pray in Hebrew, but when I pray in English, I need to focus a little more. And that, taps me. But when I see Paul and I see him having these discussions, I'm like looking at Gemara conversations happening all over again. And I'm looking at Rashis and Ralbams and Malbims happening all over again. And to me, it's fascinating seeing people engage in this conversation. And I need to be sensitive, for example, about I have my nephew, he's very young, and I don't know how much of, a conversation about Jesus I want him to necessarily be exposed to, just because the way they frame it, and not that is wrong, Jesus is this amazing person. And I don't have a problem with the fact that Jesus is a fantastic person. Just, I need to balance those things, obviously, and I have to weigh those things as a religious person, as a Jewish religious person, and how I expose, because I'm sure you know this, but a lot of this conversation wouldn't fly, obviously, in my synagogue, or wouldn't fly in, I studied for 6 years in the old city, and I taught there for a while. you would be removed from the school in theory if like this was like what you were teaching as part of like day in day out, because like I don't think the community is necessarily ready for it. But again, like it's sort of like if Paul is having this conversation within Christianity, this conversation is not happening within Judaism, and that's like a very big fear of mine.
See, that's the thing, Chezi. That's the thing, Chezi. I really do think so. Yosef is in the chat and he says, in Jacob's eyes, everything is Chabad if it's something he agrees with. Lol. And I don't think that's true, but I choose Chabad. That is the community I am involved with, even though obviously I'm not not Shomer Torah Mitzvot. I'm not Anash, right? But I've never had these problems in Chabad. These are the problems that I see. I went to Or Sameach. I know what the Misnagdisha world is like. And these are the problems I see with the Misnagdisha world that you're talking to me about. And it's not that I'm turning everything into Chabad, Yosef. I really do think that this is why I say the Rebbe was a Navi. Because the things that you're saying, and he was a Navi. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that people get all touchy when I say that. But when you look at his speeches, right, it is amazing to me that as somebody in 2022, I will go back and watch speeches that the Rebbe gave in 1960 and 1970 and 1980, and he doesn't say cringe. I don't cringe at anything he says, right?
I'm not trying to take away, the like, maybe he had prophecy, but just there's nothing wrong with also, considering the fact that, he was had a tremendous amount of foresight and wisdom, and also that's something that is, lacking. Like there's other titans out there, like, and I have no problem looking at him as like a titan. I look at Chabad as a specific title, but I agree with you that the Litvak world, and I also agree that, like, again, like with the future, I believe that it's headed for disaster. However, I don't look at Chabad as the answer. Again, I look at the things undergirding Chabad, like Chochmah Bina Dat. That game is the conversation, and that game is spilling over into, and I'm jumping into this. I'm just touching on this for a second, but like the psychedelic world that Paul is like a little more hesitant of, and rightfully so. I just believe that we have to obviously look at that carefully, but like that, it's so enticing to look at that as a shortcut, because if I could just get, Joe Rogan talks about this a lot, of like, if you could just get people to see like this, like, oh, we're all one, then, a lot of this sort of just, it gets pushed to the side because you realize that it's just the wrong way of looking at the world. And that isn't the conversation that God is having with us. And the conversation that the God is having with us in the Bible as God number two, and those words, again, like I and maybe this is the trick that I'm doing to myself, but my flexibility with historically and how divine, and what's divinely inspired and what's an allegory, that allows me to move through that and not feel stressed by, that even if God gave me the 10, he's not expecting me right now to be shunning people and throwing rocks at people. And you could be like, oh, that's obvious, but clearly there's a big community that's obvious that's doing that. And even if it's not that extreme, even in the Orthodox community, just with their attitude towards different sects within the religion. You have Sephardic Jews, you have Syrian Jews that won't marry converts, even though the converts was, it's like a crazy game that we're playing with ourselves.
So you actually hit upon one of the things, the Syrian Jewish community not marrying converts. That was one of the things that but
that's a crazy game.
It's an Isser Deoraisa. It's just Isser Deoraisa. But I won't get into that. Let me just be clear, though. I'm not saying Chabad is perfect. Chabad obviously isn't perfect, and I'm not saying that the Rebbe was the Eibishter Chas v'Shalom. He obviously wasn't. He was mistalik, and unfortunately, Chabad has not been able to deal with him being mistalik. But I think
I don't know if that's true.
Chabad has not been able to deal with the Rebbe being mistalik.
Yeah, again,
We can get into it, but the fact is, I believe you can't be a chassid without a Rebbe, and you can't go around calling yourself a chassid of a Rebbe that's nifter. That's hisnagdus as far as I'm concerned. That's a hisnagdus of its own.
Yes, but as far as yes, sorry.
But what I think is important is the question of siyata deshmaya. Siyata deshmaya actually matters. That when you say that a Rebbe or a Rav is posek a halacha, right? That there is an authority given to that person, right? Well, that's what ordination means, right? But that
I understand that, but then you're in a political game. Ordained by who? How? What does he know? What are the standards? Are the standards relevant today?
And that is what halacha is. That is what halacha is.
What I mean, but you have today in a world, you have Rabbi Kanievsky just recently passed away, right? So you have 500,000 Israelites go. Was he a titan? Was he a great leader? I don't necessarily know. Did he know a tremendous amount of Torah? Yes. Did he know how to synthesize that? Did he know how to synthesize that towards a generation, to all the generation, to a sect in a generation? Was like
that.
I don't know if I there are many aspects of who he is that I could admire, but I don't know if he's necessarily shaping a generation, and he's in no way the Rebbe, who I have a lot more respect for, because I think also they were playing a different game. But I would also just I would want to say that like you can't when you're saying that Chabad weren't successful. There's the Dayenu song on Pesach, on Passover. Dayenu means it would have been enough, we would have been satisfied. So the song is, if the Israelites just left Egypt. So we left Egypt. I'm back in Israel. My son studies in the old city. The 6-Day War. I mean, it's called the Knesset after the great Knesset we had back in the day. It has 120 members, like what we had there. Our symbols, a menorah. We're living in. One could easily claim we're living in Messianic times, right? If I showed a video of this to what the prophets were talking about, if I have my grandfather sitting playing with his great grandson in the park, and Isaiah says that the kids are going to be playing. The adults are going to be sitting down and seeing the kids play in the streets of Jerusalem. So, Chabad has sending, God's message all over the world, in every little nook and cranny in the world. We're living in fantastical times in a certain perspective. So I don't look at the Rebbe's message as lost, because, Chabad is alive and kicking. And, the Jewish story is clearly, if I want to look at it myself, I'm living the dream.
So the Satmar Rebbe's whole point was that the Yidden are willing to accept a lesser Geula, and because we are willing to accept a lesser Geula, that is why we get the lesser Geula, right? I'm sorry, okay.
By the way,
I'm not willing to accept anything but the Geula Hashlema.
I agree with what you're saying. However, I think the Geula Shlema, and again, this is just my own personal opinion, but if one wants to look at, let's say, something that would seemingly be miraculous in our day and age, which, let's say, would be like the 6-Day War, right? I mean, my grandfather was a pulpit rabbi in Cleveland at the time, and after that, he looked at his community and said, can't you hear Mother Rachel calling? And, me and my family are moving to Israel. And I think at that point, that's what the invitation looks like from God. You're back here. The story continues after against all odds. But it's up to us to want that. And I really believe that that's up to us. And it's not going to happen with division. and it's not going to happen with all these sects fighting with each other. And it's true within Judaism, and again, it's true within it bifurcates into other religions. So you're again like that has like the Paul conversation. This corner is to me just like red lights into what's happening in the Jewish community in a certain perspective, and I think that the only way that we move forward is if we forge our own destiny within the confines of halacha, but that doesn't mean we can't invigorate it with new meaning. And ironically, this goes all the way back to a famous Talmud story of Achnai's oven, right? There was a specific oven that they made,
yes.
And one of the rabbis, Rabbi Elazar, he said that this special oven can be used. It can be purified for dietary.
Actually,
consumption.
he said that it was tahor, but okay, keep on going.
Now you have people disagreeing with him and saying no, and there's a whole litany of different miracles that happen.
Right.
And ultimately, a bat kol, which would be, let's say, this divine voice comes out and says that God, the heavens agree with him. But the rabbis, the collective, come and say, well, lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in. It's the Torah is no longer in the heavens. It's with us right now. So, where is that authority today? You understand? Like, at that time, I'm totally fine with that authority challenging God and saying, like, whoa. You had your fair shot. That was when it was abstract. Once we had it now we play around with this thing. And we get to decide. We could do that again today. However, now it almost turned into what the rabbi said. That's as if God said it. And we can never change it. And no one's allowed to change it.
Okay.
Even though we know today for historical facts, like, oh, well, he said that because of political reasons, and that we're doing because of these reasons. It doesn't matter now. And only does...
Chezi, I agree with you 100% that halacha has to be in the hands of actual human beings and lo b'shamayim hi, and koach the hetera adif, and all of that, and chidush, and the necessary of Jewish renewal. But that story of the ovens of Achnai, I actually had it out with Yosef about. And I said, and I agree, and I really believe, people don't read that story to the end. Because what happens after is that they put Rabbi Elazar in Cherem, right? And he goes and cries, and Rabbi Shimon is in a boat, and storm comes, and he says, "Ribono shel olam, I did it so that there shouldn't be machlokes in Israel." And Rabbi Akiva goes and he asks for mechila.
Now, I want to just stress, what's more important there is Rabbi Akiva goes after they all sent away because he's dying. And then he tells them, you guys are fools. Yep. I'm like a Torah scroll, and I'm being rolled up right now. I'm dying right now. And I had all this wisdom in me that I knew that you guys decided to push me away from. And at that point, Rabbi Akiva decides to pull an audible, and he says, okay, give me this answer, this answer, this answer. And he, even though this quote unquote unworthy vessel, Rabbi Akiva also recognizes, says well, I can't allow this flash drive to die without me downloading some of this information, even though this information is quote unquote didn't fit within the narrative that they want. What they want.
100%. And I think that that's part of the problem of the Misnagdisha world. They stop with Lo B'Shamayim Hi, and they don't realize that actually that story in the Talmud, as far as I'm concerned, is a story of that is actually very critical of those Chachamim that are not named, as opposed to Rabbi Elazar, who did not listen to the effing Baskol. You have Nisim, and you're not listening to the Nisim. This is Hisnagdis. This is Hisnagdis.
Yes, but I hear what you're saying, but you could flip it. Because you could say that... Because another part of that conversation is, the Batko says nitzchuni banai, like my sons have beaten me, and you're
So
supposed to
Eliyahu goes and talks to the Eibishter. They ask the Eibishter what they ask Eliyahu what was, and he smiled and he said nitzchuni banai, and there's a Hasidic taich on nitzchuni, which means made me eternal. But go ahead.
So let's putting that aside, whether they'll add it on for their own benefit. But I do think that, again, I'm okay with them saying, listen, Elazar, maybe even what you're saying is true. Like, you have it in wisdom, and like you remember that's what they said. We are like Rabbi Akiva at the time. He's building the first Facebook. We're being a collective right now of, and we can't have that kind of conversation. We're also we're leaving that kind of relationship of, we went from the splitting of the sea to the great cloud in the smoke, to into the temple, to the carabs, to to the tent. Like, we're moving away from that conversation with God. Okay. And even now we have a bat call, which is like really something, I think it's like an echo of a voice. So these are the last remnants of that. And their claim is lo b'shamayim, where they're saying, like, we are no longer, like, it's getting rid of the training wheels, and it's like, we are independent of you, God, in the sense. They're like, you gave us yourself in this form, and now it's our job to dig through and rediscover you so we can reconnect. And even if what you're saying is true right now, Elazar, we can't accept it through this process. Now, I'm okay accepting that if they would still do that today. Because then at least they would be honest with, that's what we're looking for. We're just looking for truth. And we're looking to do that through our own method. So I don't mind if you want to do it through the legal way, but it has to be in a time. It has to be alive. And right now, again, like, they took that story and turned it into as if what the rabbis say is God's words, and it can no longer be changed. So
you're preaching to the choir as far as it comes of being critical of the Rabbanim that we have today and the halachic process. You're preaching to the choir, but I want to give you a mashal for how I see lo b'shamayim hi, which is your three kids. They should have all the brachas in the world, and they should never ever disagree. But if they're trying to decide what we're going to get Tati for his birthday or for whatever, right? And they're having a fight, right? And one of them says, let's call Tati and ask him. And the other two are like, no, we're getting him X, Y, and Z. So I think you would say, whatever the three of you decide on, that I would love it. I will love it. I don't care. It's from the three of you. I love it. But at the same time, the one who says, let's just call Tati, that child is the chacham.
Yeah, but that child, but that child knows how to call his dad. And that has to do with his wisdom and his relationship, and that's why Rabbi Akiva recognizes that and takes advantage of that at the last moment. However, Rabbi Akiva is saying that's not, most people aren't you, Elazar. They can't do that game that you're doing. They aren't tapped in that way. They need a system. And by the way, like, this is a little different, but this relates to what Jordan Peterson was telling Sam Harris. You, Sam Harris, have constructed this world that you as an individual can't play. And you could call it spirituality, you could call it whatever it is. You're having this own relationship with God. You're living this, you're a tzaddik person. The rest of the people can't play that game. They need rules. They need structure. And that wasn't, he is Torah Moshe Messina. And that's not that structure.
But the structure that needs to undergird all of it is Kabbalah's all, is the idea of there is Tati, and Tati does have a Ratzon, and the rest of us should be mevatel our Ratzon to what Abba wants, right?
Sure, but here's the rub. What does that Ratzon mean? And then that goes all the way back to, and this is where it becomes problematic, like I am willing to come, it's like, it goes back to the rabbi, which goes back to the text, and then the question is, how much of that text is authentic? how much of the authentic test is divinely inspired? What does divinely inspired mean? Then depending on what that means and the context it's been given in, I get a ruling. Now, what do I do with this ruling? Do I stick to this ruling always, unless I sometimes can't because of specific reasons, and then like those challenges start coming up?
So, this is halacha. You're describing the halachic process, and we need competent rebbeim. I completely agree with you that we are a dor yesumim, that we're orphans and we don't have tati to go ask. I agree with you 100%.
But what does Rav Kook talk about though? Rav Kook, I mean, what's so fascinating is also when you read Rav Kook, you realize, okay, oh, he's quoting Jung, and he's quoting this is Buber, and this is Kant, and he's aware of all this conversation, and he's integrating this jargon and this language, and he's coming out with things of, as we manifest towards the future, religion is going to look different, and regulations are going to look different, and those conversations are going to look different. Now, again, I'm not saying let's just pull, the fire alarm and let's just burn this whole thing down right now. But
look,
it's not going to look like the way.
I have no problem. I have no problem with change. I have no problem with change, because what the Rebbe did as a Rebbe was incredibly controversial, and Chassidus has been incredibly controversial over the past 300 years. And because that liveliness that Chassidus brings to the world is incredibly important. And I think what's missing in the Orthodox world is, in fact, Chassidus. And what makes me so angry at Breslov and Chabad is this idea that we don't have a Rebbe. We can't find a Rebbe. Being a dead Chassidus is the greatest hisnagdus, right? And I think I don't think this is I think this is real. I think this is very, very real. That Torah Baal Shem Tov.
What do you mean? I think it's real. I'm not understanding.
That Torah Baal Shem Tov is actually the Torah which answers these problems, which are real problems within Judaism. That Hafatzas Maimonides of the Torah Baal Shem Tov, right? That when the Rebbe spoke, he this is what's amazing to me. I was not raised religious. In fact, my parents were incredibly opposed to my religiosity, and that's mostly why I don't live a religious life right now, is because my parents were completely opposed to it, and it would have meant cutting off my parents and my whole family. It really would have. And I wasn't going to do that. Right? But what I am 100% convinced of was that the Rebbe was a Navi. And that we need Nevi'im. We need prophecy. We need revelations of God. We need to call Tati. And we don't call Tati. We don't call Tati. As Yidden, as Fruma Yidden, we don't call Tati. We say Lo B'Shamayim Hi, as if we're happy that Lo B'Shamayim Hi. And that's why I'm hanging around with the Christians. Because at least they're not going to say don't call Tati.
Yeah, but the problem is like the God, my relation, the relationship of God, the God I have a relationship with, which is more of the arena God, is not the Tati people want to have a relationship with.
First of all, I have to say you should learn more Chassidus, and maybe God will become. Maybe God will become less of Spinoza's God, because Spinoza's God is a dead God.
But again, I personally, I have no problem like integrating these things. As in, I have no problem looking at the Holocaust or the terrorist attacks that happened here, or I had terror attacks to my own family, and that doesn't make me for a second question like, how could he do this to me? Like, that's not the game he's playing. On the other hand, like, I have no problem when I'm holding my son. think to myself thoughts of gratitude and thanks to God, not because I think because he wrote down on a little piece of paper, the man in the sky said that Chezi should have this kid. Rather, all is glory, but I feel that love and I feel that relationship. So I could still feel it, this intimate relationship by not, but at no point in my head is there a man smiling at me.
Of course not, because the Abishter is not a man, right? This is the problem of Christianity. This is the problem of Christianity. They need Jesus. Why do they need Jesus? Because they can't relate to a God who is infinite and ineffable. And it's a problem. But it's a problem we have as human beings.
Do you think that's fair? You don't think Paul you don't think Paul, or at least what it seems like his conversations with John Vervaeke, right? Like, what more can you ask for as far as acceptance of like I'm saying, he's clearly comfortable with that kind of conversation.
Paul, first of all, I'm not sure if you knew, but Paul's great-grandfather was Jewish. Yeah, he comes from a long rabbinic line. When I looked into it, he's married. The family that stayed Jewish is actually they're married into all the Chashuva families in Israel now. So it's kind of funny that way. And ultimately, I think Paul very much believes in an ineffable. And even though he smiles at the Trinity, I think if the Trinity were to go away, Paul would be Makabel Ol, because he is a Makabel Ol. He is, and that's why I love him. That's why I support him. That's why I was willing to give money to a Beis Avodah Zarah like his, right?
So I'm saying Jonathan Peugeot, right? What do you make of a person like that?
Jonathan Peugeot. First of all, again, I don't think Peugeot. First of all, Peugeot says Zeus is real like Jesus is real for him, pretty much.
Exactly. So when he gives, I don't know, you heard his interpretation of Genesis.
Right. I'm not a huge fan of Peugeot. I'm not. Not that I'm not saying he's not Makabel Ol. I actually think he is. But I think Vervaeke and Peterson, they don't realize that God is real. I'm sorry, they don't see a God. They don't see a God who is as real as the Jewish God is. In our lives, we see a Hiskalus of Hakadosh Baruch Hu that I don't think people have had possibly ever.
I think though that's because, again, like I just laid out for you. It's very hard for me to not see myself with my kid as a manifestation of some sort of crazy story. So it's personally, I'm very vested. I have skin in the game because I'm the literal game. At a certain point. So in my own perspective, so it's easier to me. To feel connected. However, I do think Jordan Peterson is he is, beautiful neshama, and he is having a conversation with Hashem. Whether he calls it right. I act like God exists, or I don't, or if he feels comfortable to tell an atheist that he's really religious, then he's clearly religious.
I think that his wife got cancer. And almost died, and then was healed, because Hashem is memitu mechaye. And if chas v'chalila, one of your kids should get a cold and sneeze, chalila, that it's Hakadosh Baruch Hu who made that possible.
So I could only, you just said that kind of sentence. So how do I deal with a sentence like that? If I'm talking, there's the people I realize it's not point to get into an argument with them about them and be like, yeah, sure, that's right, your prayer. There's I could look at it and be like, listen, the prayer that helps is, the psychological fact of all the community getting together and sitting and thinking about these things, and it could psychologically be better for you, and it could lift people's spirits, but that's sort of where the buck ends. I could also come and say that this is God's doing. However, it isn't because I said these words, so the matrix code changed and now he's not sick. Because it's not like he also made him sick then, right? So it wasn't like he's testing me like I'm going to give your kid's going to have a cold today.
God,
tomorrow he's not going to have the cold.
God is not a divine vending machine. You can't wield God. God is actually agentic. And the fact that you pray doesn't mean God's going to do what you want him to do.
So my point would be then, so saying so God saved her life. God saves her life just like God gave her cancer. So
yes.
It's less so and this relates like to Job, right? It's just accepting it all. And accepting it all, then like I don't really look at like I don't look at like we should we as Jews we make a special blessing if our life is spared, right? And so
bench gomel, yeah.
Correct. So it's not because we are being like because God necessarily spared us. This just happened to us. So we're putting it in ourselves in context, and we are reminding ourselves how fascinating, how amazing it is that we're alive, and how thankful that we're alive, and how amazing this gift is. And the idea is that like that's a perfect example of rabbinic code to reinstill and like indoctrinate you into at all times recognizing those things. So whether you're praying,
say better. We don't just bench gomel. Kishem shemavarchen al hatov, mavarchen al hara.
Exactly. So, but that, and like the rules of Shiva are there for that reason, saying like we're building these rules because whether you want to or not, we believe that you must mourn, and mourning includes sit low, rip your shirt. Like these are things you need to do. And then after that period is over, do your thing. And the concept that you don't have to, you don't have to pray, or you don't have to put on your phylacteries when you're mourning is an example because like, because we say that if the one day you miss it, one day if you don't pray, then the worlds are getting destroyed, and if you don't pray, God's being upset. But somehow God is willing to, forgive all this because you lost someone. So it's realizing that these are glasses that we put on.
Right.
And these are realities that we give ourselves. But once that reality is shattered, which is like, oh my God, I just lost a loved one, then it's okay if I take off these glasses for a second and allow myself to, and the Torah is forcing me to manifest that mourning, that grief, which is like, you need to take those glasses off. That's deeper in.
Ultimately, it all comes down to Kabbalah's all. It comes down to Kabbalah's all. And being Mekabel, that there is an Eibishter in the world. That's the important part. And when we dilute Judaism and wear it as a levush, like the rabbits do, right? This is what gets the Balei Tshuva mad. No, seriously. If you come on my server, what you will see is Max. He knows who we're talking about. He gets really, really angry when he looks at the rabbit who was an atheist feeding him his version of Judaism and wearing it like a levush in drag.
So I don't know. I don't know if you would categorize me then as like a drag queen or a rabbit or not. But if so, I'm okay with it.
Let me be really chassidish with you and tell you a story. So, what happened was by the Alter Rebbe, who's the first Rebbe of Chabad, Misnagdim came up to him and said, your Chassidim are all fakers. They pretend to be Erlich Yidden, but they're fakers. And the Alter Rebbe said, Azoi. Then it should be Mekuyim on them, the Gezerah of the Mishnah. And they're like, Gezerah of the Mishnah? Which Gezerah? He says, the one at the end of Peah. And it says there that the one who makes as if he is, right? Eino mes min ha'olam ad shenasehen. Right? So, look, we're all pretenders. When I read Jesus talking about the Pharisees being hypocrites, I'm like, this is the most Yiddish thing Jesus ever said. After saying that Shema is the most important thing, this is one of the most Yiddish things that Yeshua ever said, right?
Right.
We're hypocrites. Yes, we're hypocrites. But that hypocrisy is that we say, look, I shave with a razor, Hashem Yerachem Alai. Right? I'm a Mechalel Shabbos, Hashem Yerachem Alai. But at the very least, I'm willing to realize that Shabbos is Shabbos and shaving is shaving and good is good and bad is bad. Right? And that's what gets me about the rabbits. That's what gets me about the rabbits. So now, oh, no, women can be rabbis, and gay men can be rabbis, and transsexual men who are now lesbians can be rabbis. Come on, there's an Eibishter in the world. There's an Eibishter in the world.
I think we'll have to unpack that portion, the last portion, at a later date. Unfortunately, one of my kids I see woke up. I need to put him back. He's waving at me right now. I need to put him back into bed.
Go be a good tati.
If you don't mind,
Go be
we'll
a
have
good
to call
tati.
it for today. But I appreciate this. I hope I wasn't rambling on. I hope I was coherent.
I think this was one of the best conversations I've ever had on my channel. Thank you for thank you for being on. And anytime you have time, I would love to have you again.
Sure. I mean, you have to let me know what you want to discuss. But I'm glad to talk about multiple things. But was this just you and me? I don't know. I can't even see if anyone was watching this. But
yeah, there were many people. More people watching this than most of my live streams. I'm guessing this is going to be one of my most popular live streams. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You and your family and your kids should all be benched, and you should learn more Chassidus.
I think.
We
should all be learning more.
Start with the Rashi Sichas. The Rashi Sichas will blow your mind.
I bought. I was telling you I do the weekly readings with my sons, but we do a daily Maimonides, a daily Baal Shem Tov phrase, and then they actually just got this 3-set graphic novel of Tanya for kids. So
Tanya for kids! Wow.
Tanya for kids. Yeah.
So Rabbi Sachs has a book. It's out of print, but you can see it. It's available on Chabad.org. It's called Torah Studies, where it's his adaptations of the Rebbe's Sichas. Go read the original Sichas, because somebody who actually can learn the Sichas, they'll blow your mind. The idea that somebody in our day could have chidushim on Chumash Rashi should blow any learned yid's mind. Really.
Did you ever read Art Green's Radical Judaism?
I have not. I have not.
Also,
I'll have to take a
also recommended.
Okay.
But sir, I will leave you at this note to have if we don't speak again, have a this week. But have a wonderful Sabbath.
You too.
And tranquility and clarity of mind.
Amen. Amen. Be well. So Chezi left. If anybody wants to jump into the live stream on Discord. I'm looking at you, Yosef, and discuss this. I am going to read some of these questions. Let's see. Ben says, how can they see Exodus as non-literal? Lots of people see it as non-literal. Many religions pretend that the average follower cannot understand the text. I agree with you, and I think it's a problem. I think it's a huge problem. I think God speaks to us at every level. I think that religion cannot be just for the people who think, and honestly, this is again part of Chassidus. So this has become my whole thing about pushing Torah Baal Shem Tov, but I think that's part of it. Yosef, rehashing the limits of the symbolic world and how much it must be grounded. Yes, we talked about that. Mordechai Kaplan, one of the great rabbis of the world. Judaism as a culture was incredibly important to preserve and flourish. Yeah, I mean these cultural Jews, and yeah, like Yosef says, these are people who, these are the rabbits. These are the rabbits. Ben says, it's just that I don't understand, because if I didn't believe in God, I wouldn't go to a church or synagogue or do most religious acts. You have to understand, I do get that it's more relaxing to avoid technology one day a week. Look, the fact is that in our corner of the internet, we have a lot of people like Jordan Peterson saying, and people, particularly John Vervaeke, who are saying these are important things that improve your life. And to some extent, he wants Spinoza's God. And that's what Chezi was talking about. And the problem with Spinoza's God is it's not real. And we want things to be real. Vervaeke actually gave this example. He says that at the beginning of his classes, he always asks his students, if you have a significant other, I want you to consider if that significant other had a relationship with somebody else, and they're never going to do it again, they're sorry, it's never going to happen, would you want to know? Do you want to know? And everybody says, yes, I want to know. Oi, it's going to cause you all kinds of pain and everything. I'm actually translating, because after talking to Chezi, I'm translating into Yiddish now, into Jewish. Oi, it's going to cause all kinds of tsuris, right? But you still want to know. Because it's real, because it's emes, right? The truth, emet. Torat emet nata betochenu, right? That the Torah of God is the truth. That matters. That matters. Yosef says, but are you embedded in a community? If that community are so fully embedded that even if you don't believe in God, your entire worldview would be shaped by that religious language, symbolism, etc., it can be extremely hard to leave, if not impossible. What the early modern Jews derided as the shtetl mindset. And this is my problem. This is my problem with Hisnakdus, with the Litvish community, with much of the Orthodox Judaism. Because, in effect, the complaints that Jesus had are the same complaints that Hasidism brought to Judaism, which is, it's not good enough without God, right? There's the famous story, I forget if it was the Alter Rebbe or the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, one of the two, was being supported in learning by his father-in-law. And he said he wants to go learn by the Maggid, Rabbi Dov Ber Mizrich, which, by the way, what's his name? Carl Jung said that everything that he has ever learned was already said by the Maggid, although he probably was making a mistake, because we don't have any writings of the Maggid. Anyway, so he goes for 6 months and studies by the Maggid, and he comes back, and his father-in-law says, "No, so what'd you learn? 6 months by the Maggid. What'd you learn?" He said, "I learned that there's an Eibishter in the world, and there's a God in the world." He says, "So," calls in the maid. He says, he asks her, "Is there a God in the world?" She says, "Yes." He says, "What? Why'd you need to go study 6 months by the Maggid? Even the maid knows this. A child knows this. There's a God in the world." And he responded, "She says there's a God in the world. Now I know there's a God in the world." And this is what mysticism, I believe, does. And I think this is what's important about mysticism. And mysticism, that spiritual connection, you have to pick up the phone and call Tati. You have to pick up the phone and call Tati. Tati is Yiddish for daddy. You have to call Abba. I have to call Abba. Abba, Tata Sisa. And then imagine that community was part of a culture, literature, and then you get Kaplan's, Just like most atheists in the West today are Christian atheists, one would be a Jewish atheist in this world, this perspective language. And that's what the rabbits are. That is what the rabbits are. Then I would, so Ben says, then I would ask, if a person practiced Judaism but was an atheist, would they feel comfortable telling that they don't believe in God? And this is the problem. This is the problem. That's why we have the rabbits dressed in drag. We have rabbits dressed in drag. Depends on the community. In the Haredi world, probably not. And there are definitely Haredi people there. Hashem Yerachem, you see it especially sometimes in the Hasidic world, people who don't believe at all that they don't actually believe, but so that's their world, and Hashem Yerachem. Ben says we should always be able to question any religious authority. The word Israel means to struggle with God. And if you look at the Bible, you look at Abraham, you see he struggles with God. He struggles with God himself. And if anybody on earth thinks, I don't know what to tell you. You are not a child of Abraham. Jew or Gentile, I don't care. You are not a child of Abraham if you don't do the things that Abraham did. And Abraham argued with God. And if you don't argue with God, you're not a child of Abraham. Should be the what they say. In principle, Dominic says, in principle, I agree with that, Ben, but I think one could argue there's no difference between written and oral tradition. There is a difference between written and oral tradition, but the difference needs to exist there, and it's impossible. One without the other is not possible. Dominic says, I love how much pushback Jacob is getting. Get him, Chezi. It felt, I was almost back in yeshiva. Ben says, I don't like this God number one, God number two talk. Either we see God in truth or we see him incorrectly. God is bigger than we can see. And this is one of the ways we explain God is Nose Hopchim. right? God is able to carry opposites. Why opposites? Because as finite people trying to understand something infinite, being able to see that God captures opposite things, and that's why the God number one, God number two talk actually, it's useful. It helps us see. Cancer is usually caused by toxins in good and the environment. It's not God's cause usually. I disagree with you. And that was actually the verse we were looking at earlier today on my server, if I can find it. So it says, Deuteronomy 32:39, DRA translation. See ye that I alone am, and there is no other God beside me. I will kill, and I will make to live. I will strike, and I will heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand. Re'u ata ki ani hu ve'ein Elohim imadi, ani amit ve'achyeh, machatzti ve'ani erpeh, ve'ein miyadi matzil. Just doesn't translate. Doesn't even translate. Anihu. Okay. I would rather know the truth and be hurt than be ignorant and be happy. And I think everybody would. I think everybody would. If anybody has comments, questions, anything like that, I will hang around for a little while. Possibly I will have a commentary video later today. If nobody has questions. Somebody asked on Twitch, may I ask you a question? And I apparently answered too late. Yes, please ask, which he did not do. Yeah. I am also on Twitch. This would have been a better conversation if Chezi could have seen. Unfortunately, I had all kinds of technical problems, which is why this is the introduction is missing. Yeah. I agree about how all followers of the Father wrestle with him. Yeah. If you are being true and faithful, you're going to wrestle. You're going to wrestle. You must. Uh, Bye, Ben. I'm probably going to be on later with something else. I think since nobody's asking question, I'll stick around for another 8 minutes. But yeah, be well. Look forward to people's comments, questions, and discussion. Oh, please like and subscribe. I keep on forgetting that. Um,